Greetings, beloved. Thank you for tuning in today. It is the dream of many people to purchase homes. While many people choose to purchase a home that is already built, others may choose to build from the ground up. Either way, the builder is required to use a blueprint. A blueprint is defined as a design or plan put on paper for the purpose of constructing a building successfully. The same way construction workers follow the blueprint in order to successfully build a house, likewise, Christians who want to build a solid family must be willing to follow God's blueprint to do so. Stay tuned as we discuss the design that God has given us to follow, God's blueprint for family.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for more of God's Blueprint for Family. My name is Brother Hawk Bolden, and this is my lovely wife, Sister Antoinette Bolden. And once again, we're coming to you with more of God's Blueprint for Family. And we thank God, as always, for this opportunity to be able to come before you and share some of the things that the Lord shared with us. And we want you all to understand that the things that we share with you all, the Lord shared them with us for us to live as well. And a lot of times it's through experience. And, of course, nobody's exempt from living these things that we talk about. If you want to have a healthy family, a good marriage, whatever the case may be, you have to follow God's blueprint for it.
Amen.
Amen. So we started a couple of weeks ago on the rules of engagement. And the idea is this. Of course, you know that there are going to be engagements. And when we're talking about engaging, we're talking about discussions issues that need to be resolved. And so we are calling that an engagement. Not the kind where you're asking somebody to marry you, but the kind where you are actually engaging in deep discussions and conversations. That has the potential to take a turn for the worse. Many times in marriages especially, people will have an issue that needs to be discussed, and it ends up going worse than what they intended because they're not following the rules of engagement. So it's not the issue that presents the problem, that people are not able to resolve. It's the way that they're going about to resolve it that causes the bigger problem. Every issue in this world can be resolved. But if you don't understand rules of engagement, don't set those rules and abide by those rules, then you'll constantly be at war with each other.
That's right. And I'm sure, we've all heard the saying, or maybe heard someone say, or even said it to someone. It's not what you said, but how you said it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so key when we're engaging in discussions. We kind of touched on it last week. Tone of voice, body language, facial expressions,
mm-hmm.
Attitude. All those things play a part in how successful we are in resolving things or reaching the end of a discussion with a resolution
mm-hmm.
at the end of it.
That's right. And so that's so important, these rules of engagement, understanding how to act while you are resolving whatever issue you may have. And that's one of the things that, this comes about with character, with the Holy Spirit leading us and things like that. Because when you're discussing issues that are deep, that need to be resolved, there's always a potential there for it to get worse than what it really is. And what can happen when you don't follow the rules of engagement, when you don't have rules, first of all, nobody likes to argue, I don't think. And so you can get to the point where you don't want to even engage anymore. You don't want to even get into it anymore. Let's just avoid it altogether. When in actuality, that's worse for your marriage, when you're sweeping things under the rug, because it's not the issue itself, but how things were dealt with, how the engagement took place to begin with. So that's why this is so important, because you want your spouse to be able to feel like they can come to you to discuss anything. And you don't want to, don't want them to feel like, well, if I bring this up, it's going to cause them to react this way because this is the way they reacted the last time, or whatever the case may be. And so it's important that you understand these rules of engagement, so that you can abide by them, and it also encourages your spouse to listen, to to be able to bring things to you, in the future.
Right, and I'm sure most people, when they get emotional in a conversation, their voice starts to get louder and louder. And then before you know it, you're yelling or something like that. Even if you don't mean to, your voice tends to just kind of pick up, the volume increases. And so if you know that you don't want anyone yelling at you, then of course you don't want to do that. And so those are just some of the things that when we're talking about engaging in the possibility of it going wrong, and if we're not following these rules or setting these boundaries in place, then it could go wrong. So that's just one thing that we have to keep in mind. Okay, well, I'm not going to yell. I'm going to make it a point. If I find I'm getting emotional, I'll just maybe take a break from talking and calm down, or something like that. And another thing could be probably accusing or belittling, using the wrong types of words. And I know we're going to get into that, a little bit in more detail in a little bit. But we want to be careful, in making sure we set boundaries in how we engage with each other, because ultimately we want to reach a resolution. That's the whole purpose for even having a discussion. Red flags are going up, light bulbs are going off, something is wrong. I need to discuss it. We need to have a talk about this. We need to come to a conclusion. And so we want the discussion to be successful. Doesn't mean successful doesn't mean that there won't be any disagreements along the way. And successful doesn't mean that, you may not get emotional in the midst of it, but successful is that we can discuss whatever needs to be discussed at this moment and conclude it without bending the rules of engagement and it being blown out of proportion and turning into war before we get to a point of resolution, at the end of it.
That's right. And so it's important. These rules of engagement are so important. So tonight we're going to talk about a few other things. The thing, once you have decided what you're going to, that you are going to engage, or that you are going to discuss, an issue, make sure that you determine what exactly is going to be discussed, what exactly you're going to engage about. And the purpose of determining what you're going to engage about is so that, to discuss, is to keep you from getting outside of that. Because what happens a lot of times is people will engage. Okay, we start off talking about something, peanut butter, and we end up arguing about jelly, when jelly had nothing to do with it. It's just we didn't, determine what it was we were going to discuss, what the issue is, and we didn't determine that, and so it leaves the door open for you to go in all other kind of other doors, and so determine what's going to be discussed, and that's key. That's very important, so that when you determine what you're going to be discussed, it keeps you from bringing in other things which will have a propensity to make it worse and to magnify the problem, and it also keeps you from resolving what needed to be discussed in the first place.
All right, because if you say, hey, we have a disagreement about finances, but then you bring up something, oh, you know what, the last time we were by your relative's house, you said something in the wrong attitude, and I really didn't like it, and I felt embarrassed. Okay, well, that's two totally different subjects. And so we don't want to, and I think we touched on this last week, we don't want to use one thing as an open door to discuss a whole lot of different things. You want to give attention to one thing at a time. And then another thing is, you don't want to discuss too many things at one time, because you don't want to browbeat your spouse into okay, you know what, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. You know, figure out what's the most important thing to be discussed first, you know. And then there may have to be a time set aside for some of those things from the past that were not discussed, but then maybe you feel like, you know what, I thought I could let this go, or I thought this was going away, but I see I'm still bothered by it. Let's sit down and talk about this another time. But if now is the time to talk about the financial disagreement or the peanut butter or whatever it is, let's talk about that. You know, let's identify this thing, but let's not bring up, you know, all the issues from the past in that.
Yeah, and a lot of times those other issues come up because they haven't been resolved, which is why you tackle one thing at a time and get those things settled, you know. Sometimes in relationships and marriages, people avoid issues. They feel like, well, if I avoid them, then, you know, I'm good. I don't have to hear about it. But what happens sometimes is when you avoid it or think that you're avoiding it, it leaves the door open for all of that other stuff. It just comes flooding in whenever, you know, whenever. And so that's why it's important that when you engage, you determine what's going to be discussed and you get that worked out. You know, get that worked out. And your marriage will be better for it in the long run when you tackle one issue at a time instead of letting them all stockpile on top of one another. And then when you finally do decide to engage, it's all just coming all out at one time, and you're overwhelming one another, and, you know, nothing gets resolved still because it's so much. And that's another thing. When you have so much, you know, to resolve, you know, it can be discouraging. You see, and you just feel like, okay, we got too many issues, which is why so many people just throw their hands up and just stop engaging to begin with. You see, so that's very important. So you want to stay with what's with the issue and not bring up things from the past in this current issue. You see, unless you have discussed it. In other words, if it may be something from the past or whatever the case is, but you stick with that. And while these things are being discussed, whatever it is that you've determined to discuss, while that's being discussed, you make sure that, especially, let's say, for instance, I bring up something to you that I may have a problem with. And we can get sidetracked if you say, well, you did this the other day and I didn't like it, you know. What you don't want, you want to avoid taking shots at one another. Okay? And often, and it's really all in the way that you talk to one another and things like that. It is easy when an issue has been discussed, especially if it's something, okay, that you've done that I feel like we need to discuss. It's easy for the other person to feel like they're attacked, and now I have to go on the defense. And the way I do it is by bringing up something that you've done. You see, and that happens a lot, and that's, you know, that's all a part of that. You bringing in so many other things. Well, here's the thing. If they did it yesterday, then you should have talked about it yesterday. Today, we're talking about what you did. So let's get that out the way, you see. And that's what happens is people, they throw shots at one another. Well, okay, I didn't bring this up to attack you or for you to come back and throw shots at me, you know. And so people, they go back and forth with that. Well, you did this to me, and so I did, you know, but you did that to me the other day, you see. And that's one of the things. And we have to realize what causes people to do that. It's to take the focus off of me and what I did wrong. So if you bring up something that I've done wrong, the way I take the focus off of my issue and what I need to work out is by bringing up something that you've done wrong. In other words, you're avoiding the true problem. You're avoiding what needs to be discussed, you see. And really what you're doing is not taking responsibility for what you've done, you see. And that will discourage your spouse from even bringing anything else to you. You know, if you can't, you have to be an adult about things. You can't be a child and act like I'll never do anything wrong or I can't be reproved or anything like that. That's not how marriage works, you know. You have to be willing to hear things about yourself that may be uncomfortable to you. You see, and you have to make sure, you know, you keep that line of communication open. What I mean is your spouse have to feel comfortable knowing that they can come to you with something, you know, that's bothering them without feeling like they're going to be attacked in return about something that you didn't like, you know, previously or whatever the case is.
Right.
Yeah, and so those are some of the things, and then you have to choose, of course, choose your words carefully.
Yes.
That you're discussing. And what we mean is, you don't use words like never. You never do this, or you always do that. You know,
Right.
because what you're doing is you're convicting them. You know, and basically putting them in a category of, or you may say something like, "You're never affectionate," or "You always ignore me." You see.
Right.
Well, that might not be the case, you know, and so now you're putting them in a position to have to defend the idea that no, it's not always like this. You see?
Right. And just to kind of expound on that a little bit more, I mean, when you say never, then what you, in essence, what you're saying is that this has never ever happened ever in our life together.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the chances that when we use the word never that it's actually true? You know, it's hardly ever true, you know. And so, and then it also discounts the things that that person has done when you say, you never show affection towards me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, didn't I just hug you and kiss you last night? Or, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to find better ways to express those things.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of saying, you know, you never show affection to me, I could just say, it would make me happy if you showed more affection towards me.
That's right.
You know, and that makes all the difference in the world in the words that we use. Because, again, we don't want to tear down our spouse and we don't want to tear up the marriage trying to make things right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I heard this on the radio probably about a year ago, and I thought, man, this makes a lot of sense. The radio host called it cookies, giving cookies or something along those lines. I'm not sure how the phrase was, but the term is cookies. You have the two outer portions of the cookie, and then you have the inside. And it was like whenever you have to discuss something, even if you have to give constructive criticism about anything, criticize anything that you want to be better, or you're discussing some issue that's very, very sensitive, make sure you sandwich that criticism with some affection or compliments. In other words, you make sure you let your spouse know, I appreciate this about you. Now, while we're talking about it, let me point out something that I think you could grow in. And then on the other end of that, I really love you and I love this about you. And so it's easier for that spouse to receive that because they don't feel like you're, number one, you're totally against them. They don't feel like you're disregarding all the things that they've done, and they don't feel like you're attacking them because you've expressed, hey, I appreciate this about you and I love this about you. But there's this one thing that I think we should work on together, and that's the whole idea of the sandwich or the cookie, that you have the outside, you got this thing in the middle that we're dealing with, but then it's enclosed with love and compassion and compliments and something positive, so that you're not just left with this negative comment that I'm throwing at you, or you're not feeling torn down because the only thing I'm bringing to you is something negative. And I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, and you have to be careful with how you say things and what you say. And at the same time, it takes the spouse to be humble enough to receive correction, because pride doesn't have any place in a marriage. When pride is there, then you'll always be ripe for a fight or for an argument or whatever the case is. And so, you have to do things in a loving manner, and choosing your words, carefully is the best thing, one of the best things that you can do. Choosing your words, what you say, And then it's also important that the spouse who's hearing those words are not jumping to conclusions about what they are hearing.
Right.
You know, in other words, sit down, you know, be quiet long enough to hear everything out so that you can get a better understanding of what's being said, rather than hearing the first few words and just already knowing in your mind, or thinking that you know in your mind about what they're going to say, and then hurrying up and jumping on that.
All right.
Just, you know, just be quiet until, and that's another thing we can say about the rules of engagement, is using the CB, what my wife and I call the CB effect. Now, you know, of course we have cell phones today and things like that. But there was a time when people had CBs in their vehicles, you know, which was, you know, like a radio type of thing where you could talk back and forth with other people who had CBs. Truckers still use them. And one thing about the CB, it's got this little knob on it that you push. And only one person can talk at a time. And so when they pushing, they say what they have to say, and then at the end of that, the person will say over. And then that alerts the other person, okay, I'm done talking, now it's your turn to talk. So then they'll say something, and they'll say over. The idea is, in the whole CB communication thing, is one person talking at a time.
That's right.
And allowing that person to finish what they have to say. Mm-hmm. Because it's important that that each person understand that both of their points are valid, that both of their points or opinions are valid to the other person. In other words, you know, you're in an argument. When you're arguing, basically the argument is because what I have to say is more important than what you have to say. Right. And you know, and I don't care about what you're saying. This is my point. And if you just see my point, you'll get it. You know, this will all be over if you just be quiet and listen. You know, but it's important that both people respect one another, and that means getting an understanding. Well, getting an understanding is hearing the whole thing, like what Solomon says in the book of Ecclesiastes. Let's hear the whole conclusion of the matter, you know. And so that's what you want to do, is hear the whole conclusion so that you can process what is being said accurately, and then come back, you know, with whatever response you may have, you see. It's just like a math problem. If your teacher only give you half of the math problem, there's no way you can have the answer. There's no way you can solve it. And that's the way it is in when you're engaging with people, you know, with your spouse. If you're only hearing half of it because you shut them out, you know, for whatever reason, whether it's because you just already got your mind made up that they're wrong, or because you already think you know where they're going in the conversation, if you shut them out, you're only getting part of the problem. So how can you resolve it with just part of the problem, you see? So you have to be careful with those things. So that's another thing, is the CBs. Giving that spouse, respecting them enough to listen to what they're having to say without interrupting. Because when people interrupt, what they're saying is, I already know where you're going, so let me cut you off so that we can get, you know.
Right. And that's what I was about to say. Respect is key, and it's important, and it's necessary. Whenever you're communicating, you have to respect and love that person enough to want to know what it is they're saying and get an understanding. Not just hear and not just say, okay, well, you know, I'll just be quiet long enough for you to finish, but actually get an understanding of what's being said.
That's right. That's right. And another thing we want to mention is choosing your words carefully and making sure that you don't say hurtful things on purpose. In other words, what is your motive? Think about this. Whenever you bring in something up, always ask yourself, before you even bring it up, what is my motive behind bringing this up? Because a lot of times, you've done something to hurt my feelings. I don't like the fact that you brought this up or whatever, so I'm going to bring this up. And I'm gonna nudge at you for a little bit, you know, to see. You see what I mean? What is the motive? I'm gonna tell you, the devil is slick. It could start with a look. Well, I don't like the way you looked at me, or I don't like the attitude that you had when we were discussing this. And so it goes from there, and the devil began to fill your mind with ways that you can, get at them some kind of way. Now, on the surface, it doesn't appear that way. On the surface, I got something I want to talk about. But what you need to do is ask yourself, why is it that I want to discuss this? Is it so that we can both resolve this, or is it that I want to nitpick because I'm disgusted at something, or because I'm upset about something? What is the motive behind you even bringing these things up? You see?
All right. And then when we're checking our motives, part of that is, am I really looking to resolve this because I love my spouse so much? I want us to live in peace. I want us to continue to grow together. I want us to be able to pray together, because we know that our prayers are hindered whenever we're not on one accord. I want us to be effective in our walk in Christ. I want us to live an example before our children. These things, when we're talking about motives, is it that, or is it the last time we had a conversation, I didn't really get to finish saying everything I wanted to say, so I'm going to start up another conversation, and this time I'm going to talk. I'm going to get my point across, or, like you said, I'm going to bring up something that you did so you can know that you're not perfect, that, all of these things. There are a lot of hidden motives that can be behind, the discussions and conversations that take place. And so we want to make sure that we have pure motives behind that. And be honest with ourselves.
That's right.
But sometimes, like you talk about nitpicking, sometimes it may not even have anything to do with our spouse, but maybe somebody at work really ticked us off, but we've left work, so we can't tell them anything, and we can't have an attitude with them, so now we're going to take it out on the spouse, and we're going to bring up something that they did that we didn't like, or we're walking around the house trying to pinpoint something to be aggravated about, when in actuality maybe we're already aggravated. And it might be better, to identify, okay, well, you know what, this aggravated me at work, and instead of taking it out on your spouse, talk to your spouse about it. They might be able to encourage you, or pray for you, or just to help you get through that.
That's right. That's right. And so and that's another thing. We want to keep in mind that our spouse is supposed to be our best friend. And the Bible says that we are one with our spouse. The husband is one with his wife, and vice versa. And so you don't want to say hurtful, harmful things to them, because you're doing the same thing to yourself. You're hurting yourself when you do that, in other words. And so you have to avoid words that are going to be harmful. And, we won't even use the term hurtful, because sometimes you'll say things that will hurt their feelings, just depending on where they are, But you don't want to be harmful.